November 21st, 1944. A clearing near Wassenach, Germany. The air smells of wet pine, churned mud, and cordite. It's a scent Captain Elias Vance, U.S. Army Medical Corps, has come to associate with survival or its immediate aftermath. Rain, thin and persistent as a ghost, drips from the skeletal branches of the Hurtgen forest, tapping a miserable rhythm on the canvas roof of the battalion aid station. Inside, the world is a smear of olive drab, blood-soaked khaki, and the pale, waxy faces of young men from Ohio and Pennsylvania who now look ancient. The generator outside sputters a low, constant growl, powering the bare bulbs that swing in the draft, casting long, dancing shadows over the grim tableau. Vance, his shoulders aching with a weariness that has settled deep in his bones, is stitching a clean, straight line across the forearm of a private from the 28th Infantry Division. The boy, no older than 19, stares at the tent ceiling, his jaw tight, not making a sound. Vance works with an economy of motion honed by months of this relentless, brutal arithmetic. Shrapnel in, stitches on, sulfa powder, bandage, and back to the line if you're lucky. If not, a jeep ride to the rear or a tad on your toe. He hears the rumble of a GMC truck pulling up outside, the squelch of its tires in the sucking mud. The tent flap is thrown open and a blast of cold, damp air rushes in, carrying the sound of guttural German commands being overridden by sharp American barks. Sergeant Miller sticks his head in, his helmet dripping. "Captain, we got a batch of Krauts. Rounded up in the woods south of the Cal Trail. Couple dozen. Most of 'em look half-starved. Any of 'em need patching up, they're on you." Vance doesn't look up from his work. "Are any of them dying on their feet, Sergeant?" Miller shrugs. "Hard to tell, sir. They're all pretty beat up. One of 'em's a woman." That makes Vance pause for a fraction of a second, his needle hovering over the private's skin. A woman? It's not unheard of. Flakhelferinnen, auxiliaries, nurses, but it's rare this close to the front. He ties off the suture. "Fine. Keep them clear of my GIs. Put them by the supply crates. I'll check them when I can." The private is bandaged and sent to a cot with a cup of steaming coffee. The next man is brought in, a corporal with a piece of metal in his thigh. The rhythm continues. You don't think about the one before, and you don't worry about the one after. You focus on the wound in front of you. It's the only way to stay sane in this meat grinder of a forest. An hour passes, then another. The flow of American wounded slows to a trickle. Vance finally straightens up, rubbing the small of his back. He pulls off his bloody gloves, drops them in a bucket, and walks to the tent flap, wiping his hands on a damp rag. Outside, the world is gray and bleak. The prisoners are huddled together under the dripping eaves of the trees, a pathetic collection of gray-green wool and mud. They are a mix of old men from the Volkssturm, their faces etched with a grim resignation, and a few younger men who look more like terrified boys than soldiers of the Reich. And among them, as Miller said, is a woman. She stands slightly apart, her thin frame wrapped in a stained, oversized Luftwaffe Helferin greatcoat. Her hair is a mess of dirty blonde strands plastered to her forehead by the rain. She isn't looking at the American guards or the aid station. She's staring at her own feet, as if willing them to disappear into the mud. Vance watches her for a moment. He feels nothing. Not pity, not anger, just a profound exhaustion. They are just another problem, another piece of the vast, complicated machinery of war that he has to process. He's about to turn away, to grab a ration and a moment's peace, when she looks up. Her eyes, a surprisingly pale blue, meet his across the muddy expanse. There's a fear in them that is different from the defiant glare of the soldiers or the hollow shock of the old men. It is a specific, animal terror, a quiet panic that seems directed inward. She takes a small, hesitant step forward, then another. Her movements are stiff, unnatural. The guard nearest to her raises his M1 Garand slightly, a silent warning, but she doesn't seem to notice. She is focused entirely on the aid station, on the red cross painted on the canvas, on him. She opens her mouth as if to speak, but only a choked whisper escapes. It is drowned out by the ever-present grumble of artillery somewhere to the east. She takes one more shuffling step, her hand rising slightly, a gesture of desperate appeal. Something is wrong. Vance can feel it, a doctor's instinct cutting through the fatigue. Something is terribly wrong. Captain Vance watches the German woman, her face a pale oval in the gloom. He's seen 1,000 variations of fear in the last year, but this is different. It isn't the fear of an enemy soldier staring down the barrel of a gun. It's the fear of a body in rebellion, of a betrayal from within. He gives a short, sharp nod to the guard, a silent signal to stand down. The rifle lowers. The woman, whose name he does not know, whose story is a complete mystery, takes this as permission. She moves toward the tent, her gait a strange, stilted shuffle, as if she is walking on stilts. Each step is deliberate, planned, yet clumsy. She stops a few feet from him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, the knuckles white. She is young, he realizes now, maybe 21, 22. The grime and exhaustion are a mask, but they cannot hide the fine structure of her bones, the youth in her wide, frightened eyes. She looks from his face down to the muddy ground and back up again, struggling to form words. He waits. Pushing her will only make it worse. He can see the tremor in her chin. Finally, she speaks, her voice thin and reedy, her English heavily accented but clear. "Doctor, please." He keeps his own voice neutral, professional. "What is it?" She swallows hard, a visible effort. Her gaze drops to her own lower body, hidden beneath the thick wool coat. "My legs," she whispers, the words barely audible over the patter of the rain. Something is wrong with my legs." Vance's first thought is a reflex, born of cynicism and overwork. Exhaustion, malnutrition, cold. Everyone on this front, on both sides, has something wrong with their legs. Trench foot is as common as care rations. He's seen cases so bad, the flesh has turned to a black, pulpy mass. He's tired of it. He's tired of everything. "Everyone's legs are tired," he says, the words flatter than he intended. "You've been marching, hiding. It's the cold." He expects her to nod, to accept the diagnosis of the obvious, but she shakes her head, a small, frantic motion. "No, is not tired, I cannot feel them right." She gestures vaguely. "I tell them to move, and they are slow. They are not mine." This gives him pause. Neurological, that's a different category of problem. Could be a spinal injury from a blast concussion, shrapnel he can't see. It warrants a look, at least. He sighs, a long, slow exhalation of breath that turns white in the cold air. "All right, inside, over there." He points with his chin towards a corner of the tent, away from the cots holding the American wounded. There's a wooden crate and a spare stool. It's the best he can offer. He holds the tent flap open for her. She shuffles past him, the damp wool of her coat brushing his arm. The smell of wet earth, of unwashed fear, clings to her. Inside, under the stark light of the bare bulbs, she looks even more wretched. Her face is gaunt, her skin has a grayish pallor beneath the dirt. He gestures to the stool. "Sit down." She obeys slowly, lowering herself onto the stool with a painful stiffness, her hands braced on her knees as if her legs might buckle at any moment. She keeps her eyes fixed on the floor, on the muddy duckboards that serve as a pathetic barrier against the mire beneath. Vance grabs a fresh pair of gloves from a box and pulls them on with a practiced snap. He moves a lantern closer, its yellow light pushing back against the shadows in the corner. For a moment, there is only the sound of the generator, the rain, and the quiet groans of the wounded GIs on the other side of the tent. A medic, a kid named Peterson, glances over, his expression a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Vance ignores him. This is his world, this small circle of light, the patient and the problem. The rest of it, the politics, the hatred, the flags, it all falls away. "All right," he says, his voice softer now. "Let's see what we're dealing with." He kneels in front of her. The hem of her coat and the coarse wool trousers beneath are dark with moisture and caked with mud up to the knee. They look heavy, like they are dragging her down into the earth. She doesn't move, doesn't speak. She just sits there, rigid, her breathing shallow. He places his hands on the rough fabric of her right trouser leg, preparing to roll it up. It feels cold and stiff, like a shroud. He expects to see the usual signs of life on the front: mud, sores, maybe the beginnings of immersion foot. He is prepared for something unpleasant. He is not prepared for what he is about to find. With a firm grip, he begins to push the wet, heavy fabric upward, over the calf, toward the knee. The wool is stubborn, stiff with a mixture of dried mud and dampness, and it scrapes against the skin underneath as he pushes it up. For a moment, all Captain Vance sees is more grime, the pale, dirty flesh of a lower leg. He continues to push the fabric upward, past the calf muscle, exposing the limb to the unsteady lantern light. And then he stops. His hands freeze on the rough material. The air in his lungs seems to lock in place. For a long, silent moment, Elias Vance does not move. He simply stares. The professional detachment he has cultivated for years, the mental wall that separates the doctor from the horrors he treats, crumbles into dust. What lies before him is not a simple injury. It is not a wound from a bullet or a piece of shrapnel. It is something else entirely, something slow, insidious, and utterly grotesque. The leg is swollen to nearly twice its normal size. The skin is stretched so tight it has a glossy, unnatural sheen, like waxed paper. But it is the color that steals his breath. It is a horrifying tapestry of decay. Patches of waxy, deathly white mingle with vast, mottled continents of deep, bruised purple, and a sickening yellow-green that speaks of old blood breaking down beneath the surface. It is not the angry red of a fresh infection, but the passive, silent discoloration of tissue that is losing its fight for life. He can see the faint outline of the tibia bone, but only as a slight ridge in a landscape of taut, edematous flesh. There are no visible cuts, no open sores, but the entire limb looks like one massive internal bruise. It's as if she had been systematically beaten with clubs from ankle to knee, left for weeks, and then plunged into ice water. He reaches out a gloved finger, his movements now slow, hesitant. He gently prods the skin just above the ankle. It does not rebound. His fingertip leaves a deep white pit in the swollen flesh, a small crater that remains for a terrifyingly long time before slowly, sluggishly beginning to fill back in. Pitting edema. Severe. He's seen it before in patients with congestive heart failure, with kidney failure. He has never seen it like this, in a young woman in the middle of a war zone. This is a sign of systemic collapse. Her body is failing on a fundamental level. He slides his hand up her calf. The limb is cold, not just cool from the November air, but a deep, penetrating cold that seems to emanate from the bone. It is the coldness of poor circulation, of blood struggling to reach dying extremities. The woman, Anya, remains perfectly still on the stool, her head bowed. She watches his hands as if they belong to someone else, working on a body that is not hers. A single tear escapes her eye and traces a clean path through the dirt on her cheek. "It does not hurt," she whispers, her voice hollow. "Not anymore. It is just heavy, full." The word full hangs in the air between them. Vance understands immediately. The sensation of internal tension she's feeling isn't muscle, it's fluid. Gallons of it, trapped in tissue that has lost its integrity. Her circulatory system is breaking down, unable to return fluid to the core. This is what she meant. Something's wrong with my legs. They are not mine. She is losing control because the nerves are being crushed by the pressure, the muscles starved of oxygen. She isn't just tired or cold. Her legs are drowning from the inside out. He slowly, carefully rolls the trouser leg back down, covering the ghastly sight. But the image is burned into his mind. He feels a cold nut tighten in his stomach. He has to see the other one, praying it won't be the same, knowing with a dreadful certainty that it will be. He moves to her left leg, his own movements feeling stiff, robotic. He takes the hem of the trousers. His hands are steady, but his mind is reeling. In this muddy tent, surrounded by the familiar, violent trauma of war, he has just uncovered a different kind of violence, the quiet, creeping violence of starvation, exposure, and prolonged, unimaginable hardship. He lifts the fabric, and his last flicker of hope dies in the yellow lantern light. The left leg is the same, a mirror image of silent, colorful decay. He is a doctor who has set shattered bones, clamped bleeding arteries, and pulled metal from the chests of dying men. But he has never seen anything like this. He remains kneeling before her, frozen, the world reduced to this living decomposition, a testament to a suffering so profound it has literally rotted the flesh on the bone. Captain Vance remains on one knee, the lantern light flickering across the grotesque landscape of the woman's legs. His mind, usually a swift and orderly place of diagnosis and procedure, has become a maelstrom. He sees symptoms, but they don't form a neat, single diagnosis from a textbook. This is a clinical portrait of total systemic failure, painted by the brutal artist of war. He sees the classic signs of severe, wet beriberi from thiamine deficiency, causing the massive edema. He sees the purplish discoloration, the purpura, a hallmark of advanced scurvy, where capillaries become so fragile they burst under the slightest pressure, even the pressure of the body's own weight. The waxy pallor and deep, chilling cold speak of immersion foot, the tissue damage caused by prolonged exposure to cold and wet conditions. But it's compounded by something more. This is not just an affliction, it is an archaeology of suffering. Each symptom tells a story. The edema speaks of a diet of nothing, of a body so desperate for protein that the albumin levels in the blood have plummeted, causing fluid to leak from the vessels into the surrounding tissue. The scurvy tells of months without a single fruit or vegetable, of a body unable to repair itself. The immersion foot whispers of weeks spent hiding in a flooded cellar or a perpetually damp foxhole, her feet never dry, never warm. He rises slowly, his joints protesting. He looks at her face. The gaunt cheeks, the listless eyes, the cracked lips, they are all part of the same terrible picture. He is not just looking at a patient with a strange ailment in her legs. He is looking at the physical manifestation of the German war effort's collapse. He is looking at what happens when a nation grinds its own people into dust. This young woman, this Luftwaffenhelferin, wasn't wounded by a bomb or a bullet. She was dismantled piece by piece, by hunger, by cold, by unrelenting stress and fear. The shock that holds him rigid isn't just medical revulsion. It is a profound human horror. He has been trained to fight disease and injury, enemies with clear names and established treatments. But what is the treatment for this? How do you cure a body that has been eroded by the very world it inhabits? You can give a man penicillin for an infection, you can set a broken bone, but you cannot simply command a body that is actively consuming itself for fuel to stop. "How long?" he asks, his voice rough. "How long have you been out here?" She looks up, her pale blue eyes seeming to focus on him for the first time. "Since Aachen," she says softly. "The bombing. My unit was gone. I was with a few others. We hid in the forest. Since Aachen. That was weeks ago. Weeks of hiding in the Hurtgen, the green hell, with nothing but what they could scavenge. Eating roots, bark, whatever insects they could find. Drinking stagnant water from shell craters. Sleeping in the cold, unforgiving mud." Vance can now chart the progression of her illness in his mind. The initial weakness and fatigue, the tingling in her toes that she probably ignored, the first signs of swelling in her ankles dismissed as a consequence of being on her feet. Then the inexorable, creeping march of fluid up her legs, the deepening bruises that appeared from nowhere, the growing numbness that replaced the pain. And finally, the terrifying loss of control she described, The moment her brain sent a signal to her legs, and the response came back sluggish, alien, delayed. He realizes with a sickening certainty that the damage is not confined to her legs. The fluid is likely building in her abdomen, around her lungs, around her heart. The organ that is supposed to pump blood is being crushed by the very fluid it is failing to manage. A medic, Peterson, walks over, drawn by the captain's long silence. "What is it, sir? Gangrene?" Vance shakes his head, not taking his eyes off the woman. "No, Peterson, it's worse." How could he explain it? Gangrene is an invasion. This is a surrender, an unconditional internal surrender. The medic peers down, trying to get a look, but Vance steps in the way, shielding her. He feels a sudden, fierce, and entirely illogical sense of protectiveness. This is not a spectacle. This is a desecration. "Get me a blanket," he orders, his voice sharp, "and a canteen of warm water. Not hot, warm." Peterson, taken aback by the captain's tone, scurries off to obey. Vance turns back to the woman. Anya. He should call her Anya, at least in his own head. He is no longer just a U.S. Army doctor, and she is no longer just a German POW. In this moment, they are something more fundamental. A physician and a patient, adrift in a sea of madness. And the physician is staring at a disease he has no name for. A condition born of pure, distilled misery, and he feels a chilling, terrifying sense of his own inadequacy. The medic returns with 2 coarse, brown army blankets and a steaming canteen. Vance takes them without a word. He unfolds one blanket and, kneeling again, gently drapes it over Anya's legs, covering the evidence of their slow decay. The simple act feels both profoundly necessary and utterly futile. It is like covering a mortal wound with a handkerchief. He hands her the canteen. "Drink this," he says, slowly. Her hands are trembling so badly she can barely hold it. He steadies it for her, his gloved fingers brushing against hers. He feels the chill of her skin even through the layers. She takes a few small sips, the warm water seeming to cause her pain as it goes down. He pulls the other blanket around her thin shoulders. She huddles into it, a small, shivering bundle of humanity. For the first time since she entered the tent, a flicker of something other than fear appears in her eyes. It is a look of exhausted, bewildered gratitude. It hits Vance harder than any scream of pain he has heard all day. He knows what he should do. He should get her to a field hospital, a place with real beds, diagnostic tools, and intravenous drips of saline, albumin, and vitamins. A place that could, maybe, begin the long, slow process of reversing the catastrophic damage. But he also knows the brutal reality of his situation. The jeeps that ferry the wounded to the rear are for American soldiers. An ambulance won't be dispatched for a single German POW, especially one whose condition is not the result of direct combat. The system of military medicine is a triage machine, designed for efficiency in the face of overwhelming demand. A GI with a gut wound takes precedence. A lieutenant with a shattered leg takes precedence. A case of advanced systemic malnutrition in an enemy auxiliary is so far down the priority list it might as well not exist. He is trapped. He has the knowledge to understand what is happening to her, but he lacks the resources to stop it. Here, in this leaking tent in the middle of a battle, all he can offer are blankets and warm water. It is a gesture of compassion against an avalanche of cruelty. He stands up and moves to a medical chest, his mind working through the meager options available. He finds a small box of multivitamin pills, part of a supplemental ration for troops showing signs of fatigue. He shakes 2 into his palm and walks back to her, holding them out. "Take these." She looks at the small, colored pills as if they are jewels. She takes them with another sip of water, her throat working to swallow. He knows it's a drop in the ocean. Her body is likely too far gone to even properly absorb them. But it is something. It is an act. It is a refusal to simply stand by and watch. He finds a spare K-ration box and places it in her lap. "Eat this later, when you can, slowly." She just nods, clutching the box to her chest, her eyes closed. The artillery in the distance picks up again, a low, rumbling conversation between opposing gods of destruction. The war, which had seemed to recede for a few minutes in this small corner of the tent, comes rushing back in. Soon, the prisoners will be marched to a temporary enclosure in the rear. She will have to walk. Vance looks down at the blanket covering her legs and feels a cold dread. The exertion, the stress on her already failing heart, she might not make it 100 yards. He walks to the tent flap and looks out into the deepening twilight. The rain has turned to a wet, heavy snow, the first of the season. The flakes drift down, blanketing the mud, the shell craters, and the huddled prisoners in a layer of pristine, indifferent white. He can see the guards getting restless, wanting to move their charges before full dark. His job here is done. There are other men to see, other wounds to stitch. But he cannot shake the image of her legs, that silent, vibrant testament to suffering. He has treated the enemy before, patching up soldiers of the Wehrmacht with the same professional care he gives his own men. But this was different. Those were soldiers, active participants in the violence. This woman, she was a victim of the war's sheer, grinding weight. She carried the entire conflict within her, in the fluid bloating her tissues, in the blood weeping from her capillaries. Captain Elias Vance turns back from the cold, his face grim. He realizes that for the rest of his life, long after the sounds of the guns have faded, he will be haunted not by the shredded limbs and gaping wounds he has been trained to fix, but by the quiet, creeping horror he saw tonight. A horror for which there was no suture, no bandage, and no cure.